A few years ago I was contacted by Sam Dawson. He was looking for his maternal grandfather, his mum's unknown father, and was hoping to use DNA to solve the mystery of who he was. His mother, Anne, had been told her father was called George Stephenson and he was from the north east of England, and that he had something to do with horses and may have been good at maths. That was all she knew. Sam asked if I could help. He and his mum Anne and their family were from the West Midlands originally, but these days they live in Australia. I was able to solve the case, find George Stephenson, and eventually put Anne in touch with a new half-sister, Linda, who she knew nothing about. I recently contacted Sam to find out how things were going, and we had a chat on Zoom. This is some footage from that catch-up.
Yeah, I'm just going back through my book that I did, my Hunt for George book. Yeah,
I don't know
show
about
you
that. Tell me about that.
This is my Hunt for George book, which basically explains the entire story of how you did it.
No.
Yeah, I'll send it to you now. I decided I had to to explain to people, right? So basically, it goes through from. Hang on a minute. I can do it. I'll be more efficient than this. So yeah, this is the Hunt for George. So I've just been through this with Sarah just to remind ourselves. So this was just what I put together that sort of says this is, and I'll send it to you because then you've got all the details, right? So this was the starting point was, you remember all this. Father was rarely discussed, but we had a name because I found out later that Mum asked on it. Well, I found out Mum asked on her wedding day what his name was, and they just told her. So they clearly knew a lot more than they really let on. And then that's a maternal family tree, which was all well understood. And then it just goes slowly through the mistake I was making, which was just emailing people saying, "Do you know the name surname Stevenson?" But then you turned up and helped, and you sort of picked up on that, which then started this method. So this is how I just described what you explained to me, that we found a connection from Sue Ann Knight, which got us. We were able to get rid of all the maternals first. Then we started digging through Lewis and then John and then Chris and Tracey, and just going through each of those to get to this point when we got to Charles Wood, which was one of the first key steps. And that then got us through from Charles Wood, got us to...
you spelled Middlesbrough with an extra O in that first slide.
Have I? Okay, well, that'll get me in trouble. Well, I thought it was spelled like that.
No, it's not. It's only one O in Middlesbrough.
Is it? Okay, all right, I'll get myself told off then. And then that got us to this, which was, I think, when it really started getting interesting, was it's got to be one of this lot.
Yes.
Right, and then that got us to I was just saying to Sarah, what I like about this was the moment when your research changes from being that real sort of DNA understanding research to being just a bit of common sense, actually, to say, well, these kids here, the kids of Richard and Violet, were too young, so it's probably not them. And then, of course, we had that Edith we don't know about, and then we had this moment when Thomas turns up. So on that particular, we happen to see Thomas, and
that was the key for me. If I remember this, when I was doing this research, a lot of people don't have a name of the person.
No, of course, yeah.
So it was unusual that your mum, that Anne, had a name. We didn't know yet if that name was fanciful, but it was a name. So as I started to work through Edith's family and her primary records, and I came to the fact that she had somebody living with her whose name was Stephenson, that then made me think, oh, Stephenson, that's an important name. That's a name I need to hone in on.
Yeah.
Of course, George Stephenson's a very famous name on Teesside because of his involvement with the Darlington Railway. That's a different
well, that sort of stuff. But I think, but one thing I always liked about this was you started off with that message to me of you've got to almost forget the name, but we were lucky in the sense that when underneath Edith Maud Wood you got to we proved that, then you got to this point, which basically says through DNA we know that Lewis Strangeways comes through Edith Maud Wood to my mum, and John Davis allowed us to prove that you could go through Edwin Stevenson to my mum. And this got us to, well, it's one of these two fellas. There's only the two of them, right? That one of those two is dad, is granddad, right? It's my granddad, right? And once you get there, it's then a simpler step to say, well, you know, it's reasonably logical to say, well, you kind of follow up with George, because everything about George lines up. Because once we spoke to David, as he's known, the politician bloke, he can, you know, that confirmation that George was a bookmaker kind of makes you go, that's the horses bit, and you kind of, it's got to be Linda, and it was Linda. So yeah, so that got us to.
Well, that's amazing that you've put that together.
Yeah, because I wanted to be able to tell the story of how you did it. I'll send it to you, but then then in the back I then just pasted in all the stuff, because I'm a bit of a fan that, you know, you do, and then this bit was interesting as well, because I got a bit carried away then and did the where did they live, you know, because we didn't know any of this, right? So
well, that's the important part, isn't it? It's important for you and for Anne to know who Anne's father was, but then you want to put some flesh on the bones. He doesn't need to know about their lives and what kind of work they did and what the area was like where they lived.
Yeah, well, this was fascinating, because you can use all of the because obviously once we found him, I can look at other census docs, and I can see where he moved around in that South Bank zone. That's amazing. You know, where his dad lived, where he came back to, and you can pinpoint it all and go, oh, right, okay, that was. And obviously you can zoom into that area now, and most of it's pretty derelict, frankly. But you can do that, and obviously it makes sense to did that from my mum's side as well, which was quite interesting. See where my mum lived and moved around. So yeah, so yeah, I found that very helpful as a way of, you know, it's a way of explaining to people what happened. So when people say, how did you do it? I just stepped through the book. The way I thought about it and explained it to people was, what the DNA gives you is all this cluster, all these people, I use the word clusters, all these people that you're connected to in somehow. And I think what I was trying to do, I was trying to find somebody, out of all those thousands of people, I was trying to find one. I was thinking that there was going to be one person that was going to know my answer. But what you did, which makes so much more sense, is say, well, let's take this 1,000 people and let's break them into groups. And if we can create a little group, then that group has somebody sitting above it, and that somebody sitting above it is important. And then if we can connect somebody else up to that person, then you start being able to say, we have somebody here that is fundamental to my relationship, and I must be related to them. Then you can forget about the 1,000 people. And I think that for me was the key, was getting to that person, or for you getting to that person, and being able to say, right, now I've got to work on here. I don't know, I can forget the 1,000 people. And like I said, my brain originally was there's thousands of people, and hopefully one of them is going to answer my email. That wasn't going to work, but I didn't know that. Of course, until we have those names, the powerful tools like Throughlines aren't going to work, because we can't find shared ancestors, because I don't know any of them. And I, beyond Stephenson, of course, I knew nothing. Once you get third, fourth, fifth cousins, the amount of surnames, and until I stopped and thought about it, I'm expecting Stephenson to pop up in my search. Well, by the time you go up and down again, there's 1,000 surnames. It doesn't.
Well, what I always find interesting is that the biggest, highest cluster of the biggest group at the top of your list, the one that you ask the most people in, that you get on with the most and brings you the most information, might be a great grandparent called Wilson, you know, and they might not even be from the northeast. They're the anchor that gets you going, but they might be anything to do with the Stephensons of County.
Yes, and I think for me that was the bit that I hadn't realised. Obviously, being really new to this, but you kind of go, that makes perfect sense. That the first bit you did was Louis Strangeways and Claire Whittingham, I think it was Tracey Whittingham, and being able to say, well, these two people who you have a shared DNA with have a shared ancestor here. So this person must be important. And that stake was the bit that I would never have thought of doing. And that's the bit that you go, right, now that we've got that person gets you there. And then lots of other people prove then that Edith, Maud Wood, Edwin was critical to the story. Charles Wood, I think, was critical to the story. And it's that process that you kind of, you just wouldn't get to just by playing about with emails. And that's the for me, that came across as the bit you had to crack. And that's why, in terms of writing it down and explaining it to myself, I wanted to understand that. And you go, no, that makes sense. You crack that nut, and that gives you an anchor 3 generations back that must be somewhere in my mum's tree. And then all I've got to do is get from there to there, and to get to there from there, you're going to go through my dad, my granddad. So it kind of makes a lot of sense.
Well, I hope next time I speak to you that Anne and Linda will have found a way to get together in the flesh.
We hope so. Like it's in that. Obviously, the last 2 years has stopped it a bit, and at 81, you're slowly getting a bit older. But absolutely, we need to. It's on the top of the things we must do list, and obviously, we have a huge debt of gratitude to yourself and to the principles of DNA. To have got us from.
We all owe everything to Professor Alex, whatever his name is, which I ought to be honest. Created DNA profiling in 1986.
Yes, and has given us this tool.
Alec Jeffrey is the professor. His name's just come to me.
Okay, cool.
I went to his lab last year, where he's retired now, but I went to the desk in the lab where he was sitting at the moment when he had his eureka moment, when he realised that DNA profiling was a thing and could be a thing.
Yeah.
I went and paid homage to him and his work.
So you should.
For all of us, for you and Anne, for all of us.